Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on the best mid laners for patch 5.18. So first up I have Lux. Lux is actually sitting at the highest win rate for any mid laner in the game right now, and the reasons behind this, in my opinion, are because of the buff she got to her Q in patch 5.17, as well as she's a pretty good counter to the Juggernauts or immobile champions. The reason that she is a pretty good pick against Juggernauts and immobile champs is because she's a skill shot oriented mid laner, and it's a lot harder to land skill shots obviously if you're playing against like mobile champions, but with a lot of immobile champions being played or champions without dashes, Lux is just a much stronger pick right now. So for example, like the top tier junglers are Skarner and Elise, and they don't have a dash. The top tier top laners are Garen and Darius. They don't have a dash either, so that just makes Lux a pretty good pick against them, and that is why I think her win rate is increasing lately. She also does have pretty strong crowd control coming out of her Q as well as her E, and her AoE shield is probably one of the most underrated parts of her kit. It's really nice for team fighting, and you can just keep your teammates really healthy by using your shield. If you can get like a 5-man shield off in a team fight, then that's gonna definitely increase your chances of winning that team fight. And she also does have pretty long range wave clear compared to some of the other mid laners in the game. Her E is actually one of the longer range skill shots in the game, and she does also have a very low cooldown ultimate, especially once you hit late game. I'm pretty sure it's on like a 30 or 40 second cooldown once you get rank 3 in it, so that's just really nice for getting a little bit of poke off before you start a team fight, or just for getting some wave clear in the late game. She's a pretty strong laner too. Her passive just allows her to trade really nicely in the laning phase, and once she does hit level 3, as long as she can land her skill shots, she can pretty much win every single trade because she's got the extra damage coming out of her passive, and then she's also got her shield, so it's really hard to lose trades as Lux in the laning phase. So a few cons to Lux is that she's not the best champion to pick into assassins because she is immobile. So if you're going up against like a Zed or a Talon or Yasuo, I'd recommend just picking someone else than Lux, because unless you're really confident on the champion, you're probably not going to have a very good time. And her E also doesn't one-shot the wave like some of the other strong mid-lane wave clear champions can do. Next up I have Victor. So Victor, I think that even though he did receive that nerf back in like 5.15 or 5.16, I still think he's a really good mid-lane pick. His late game is one of the best in the game, and he can still one-shot late game, which is why he's still a really good pick. He's got great wave clear as well with his E, some of the best wave clear in the game for sure, and his zoning potential is really good too with his W. He can basically block off a whole area with his W. For example, if you're taking like Dragon, you can use that to block off certain choke points and just take that Dragon really easily. So I do think that Victor's W is definitely another underrated part of his kit like Lux's E is, and he does have very strong one-shot potential like I said. His AoE damage is also really strong like Lux's. His E and his ultimate both provide pretty good AoE damage, and his mobility in teamfights once he does get his Hex Core upgraded is pretty good as well with the mobility he gets whenever he lands his Q. And a few cons to Victor though is that he does not have any mobility in the early game, so you do have to be careful about your positioning in the laning phase because you are a pretty easy gank target. And his E also can be hard to use at first. I found that I could never land Victor's E the first like 5 or 6 games I played him, but once you get used to using his E, it's definitely not too hard to use. Next up I have Fizz. I think that Fizz is definitely the best assassin in the game right now. He's probably the most annoying champion in the game to play against, because if you're going up against a CDR Fizz, his E is on a 4 or 5 second cooldown once you get that maxed out, and if he builds Zhonya's, then he's pretty much invulnerable for like such a long duration, and he's just really slippery and really hard to kill. His level 6 all-in is really strong as well, especially if he's playing against one of those immobile mid laners like a Lux or a Twisted Fate. He's a really good counter to Twisted Fate, so because Twisted Fate is a meta champion right now, I definitely recommend picking Fizz into him. He's also got really good mobility with his E and his Q. Like I said, he is really hard to kill in teamfights, especially once he does get that Zhonya's. And his E is pretty OP in my opinion. I don't really call things OP, but I think that E Fizz's E is the closest thing to OP in the game because it gives you an invulnerability and it also gives you mobility as well as damage, so it's a pretty strong ability, that's for sure. And he is also a great roaming champion because of that mobility, and once he does hit level 6, as long as he can land his ultimate in a gank, then he's pretty much guaranteed a kill, and he does also snowball very hard. One con to Fizz though is that he does have a little bit of a weaker early game, especially against some of the ranged champions in the laning phase because he is a melee pick, so if you're not very confident in your lane matchup, then just start the Flask so you can sustain the early game. Next up I have Twisted Fate. I think that Twisted Fate, just due to his global presence on his ultimate, he's just a really good pick. So as long as you can get past the laning phase, his early game isn't the strongest, like he doesn't have great kill pressure in the laning phase, but as long as you can survive the early game and get a nice ultimate down bot lane once you do hit level 6, then you could just end up snowballing your bot lane and just snowballing the game. So I think that a good Twisted Fate player can definitely carry really hard. Once you get your W maxed out, it's a 2-second point and click stun as well, so that's just really good, especially once you get to those late game team fights, because his W's on like a 4 or 5 second cooldown, and you get a 2-second stun every 4 or 5 seconds. That's pretty strong. His wave clear is also really good with his red card as well as his Q, and he's a very strong tower pusher once he does pick up the Lich Bane, because his W, you always want to lock a blue card when you're playing Twisted Fate and you're pushing down a tower, because the blue card will deal maximum damage to the towers, and once you do get that Lich Bane, then you're just going to be able to shred through the towers really nicely. He is also a pretty safe laner, like he doesn't have a lot of kill pressure in the laning phase, but it's also pretty hard to kill Twisted Fate in the laning phase because he can just sit back and farm with his Q if need be. His one-shot potential late game is also really good. One stun and like followed up by your Q, and if you have your E passive up, then you're pretty much guaranteed to one-shot a squishy. And a few cons to Twisted Fate are that he does not have any mobility, so like Victor, you do have to be careful in the laning phase that you are not pushing out too far. In my opinion, he is a little bit harder to play as well. I think there's a pretty large margin between a average Twisted Fate player and a very good Twisted Fate player. In my opinion, a very good Twisted Fate player will be constantly looking at his minimap once he hits level 6 and looking for an opportunity to use his ultimate, whereas an average TF player will sometimes look at his minimap but definitely miss some good ult opportunities. And also a really good Twisted Fate player will lock his gold card on the first time around of using his W, whereas an average TF player will lock his W on like the second time around of the rotation of his W. So I think that he is definitely not the hardest champion in the game, but he is harder than some of the other mid lane picks. And last but not least, on the top 5, I have Ahri. So I've had Ahri at the #1 spot for a few patches in a row now, and some people may say like Ahri doesn't deserve the #1 spot, but I still think that Ahri is a really good pick for solo queue. She hasn't been nerfed recently, she's still got like great mobility, she's got great pick potential, and I really don't see a reason to take her out of the #1 spot. So pros to Ahri are she does have that insane mobility. Her ultimate, once she hits level 6, provides her like 3 dashes, which just makes her so hard to gank at level 6, and her Q also gives her great mobility as well. Her pick potential with her charm can basically single-handedly win you games. If you can get that on like the enemy mid laner or AD carry in a team fight, then if it's late game, then you've pretty much won the game for your team right there. She's got good wave clear as well with her Q and her W, and she is a fairly safe laner. She can sit back and farm with her Q if she is in a harder matchup. Her level 6 all-in, as long as you can land your charm, is really strong as well because she does have pretty good damage paired with that ignite at level 6. She's a great roaming champion too. I think that Ahri is probably one of the best, if not the best, roaming mid laner in the game, other than like Twisted Fate, because she's got 3 dashes with her ultimate, she's got her charm, which just makes her roam so strong. The sustain coming out of her passive is also really nice for the laning phase, just being able to stay healthy and pick up as much CS as possible. And the true damage coming out of her Q is also a really nice bonus to her kit. As long as you can land that like true damage proc on your Q, then the chance of you winning that trade if you land a charm is really good. One con to Ahri is that she is very skill shot reliant. Her charm and her Q are both skill shot, so if you're not a skill shot player, then Ahri may not be the best champion for you. First up on the honorable mentions, I have Annie. So Annie is probably the most simplistic mid lane pick, and I think that if you're just looking for an easy mid lane champion who can win you solo queue games, I would definitely recommend picking up Annie. She's just got a simple combo to use in every single team fight, which is the stun Tibbers followed up with all her other abilities, and as long as you can get a good AoE Tibbers off in a team fight, then you're pretty much guaranteed to win that team fight if it's late game. So I think that Annie is still a great pick just due to her simplistic kit and her strong burst damage. Next up on the honorable mentions, I have Diana. I think that Diana is a pretty good pick, especially against assassins. She's a pretty good pick against them because she has her shield on her W, which allows her to trade really nicely against other assassins, and she's also got pretty good burst damage herself. So once she does hit level 6, she can all in a lot of other assassins in the game really nicely, and I think that if you're looking for a counter to champions like LeBlanc or Talon or Yasuo, I would recommend trying out Diana. Next up, I have Orianna. So I think that Orianna is a pretty solid pick for mid lane. Her ultimate is really strong for team fighting, and she's also got a pretty safe laning phase as well. She doesn't get countered like basically by any mid lane champion in the game. She can just farm with her Q if need be, and she can also trade really nicely because of her shield. So I think that if you're looking for a strong utility mid laner, then Orianna is definitely a very good pick. Next up, I have Talon. So I rate Talon a little bit higher than other AD assassins like Zed and Yasuo because he's a little bit easier to play in my opinion. He doesn't take as much skill as someone like a Zed or a Yasuo because his combo is pretty simplistic and you know what you're gonna have to do every single team fight, whereas champions like Zed and Yasuo, you can do many things and you can do many combos with them, so it definitely leaves for more margin of error when you're playing those other champions. So as long as you can like survive the early game as Talon, and if you can get a snowball going, then he can be a very strong mid lane pick. Next, I do have Yasuo. So like I said, Yasuo is a little bit harder to play than Talon, but I do still think that he's a very good pick. I've seen some pretty good Yasuo players in solo queue lately, and they've just carried really hard. I think that he's a lot better if you can pair him up with someone like a Malphite or a Wukong or someone that does have a knockup, but if you cannot do that, he still is a pretty good pick, but he just becomes a much stronger pick if you do get that knockup synergy. And last but not least, on the honorable mentions for 5.18, I have LeBlanc. LeBlanc is actually a pretty underrated pick right now, and I think that she's slowly making her way back into the meta. She's a great pick against champions who are immobile like Lux, Twisted Fate, and Victor, so if you're looking for a good counter to them, I would definitely recommend trying out LeBlanc right now. She's got really good mobility with her W. Her snowball potential is probably one of the best in the game for any mid lane champion, but if she does fall behind, she is pretty weak, and she does also fall off a little bit late game when the enemies start getting Banshee Shield, so I don't think she is like a very strong pick, but I do think that she's still a pretty good pick for solo queue. So that is all for the video, guys. If you enjoyed, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you all in my next video.